Okay, we're seeing the first real push. I don't know if I would quite call it a media push yet, but we're starting to see it pushed by some folks in the media for NATO, the West, but basically the United States, to enter the war in defense of Ukraine, take on Russia, and start World War III. There are people seriously considering this. I saw a couple days ago on Twitter, people were starting to normalize nuclear war, saying, oh, you see, just because a nuclear bomb goes off, that doesn't mean everybody dies immediately. Nuclear bombs aren't that different from regular bombs. You shouldn't be so scared of two nuclear countries going to war with each other, hypothetically. But then last night, we got this nuclear scare no matter how many times I hear the name, I'm not going to be able to say it. Zaporizhzhia, or Zaporizhzhia, something like that. It's actually not in that city. It's in a town called Energard, something like that. I can't remember. Or maybe it was Energrad or Enerograd. One of those names. And it was supposedly coming under shelling from the Russians. Oh my gosh, this is so scary last night. The Russians are shelling a nuclear power station. They've damaged the first reactor. There are 6 reactors. This is gonna, if it melts down, it's the largest nuclear plant in all of Europe. It's going to be 10 times worse than Chernobyl. But hey, lo and behold, we have a live stream feed of where the Russians are attacking on YouTube that the nuclear power plant is putting out, so we can all watch the Russians, attack and blow up and cause a disaster 10 times worse than Chernobyl. And the reason why the Russians are doing this is just because they're so evil and so incompetent that they would risk, all the lives of these people and cause this disaster. Russia is so bad, and we must intervene. Therefore, there must be a no-fly zone of some point or of some sort. I'm going to get to this to keep the Russians from, affecting everyone. Because you see, if this nuclear power plant were to melt down, that wouldn't just affect Ukraine. That would affect NATO countries. And so NATO has to do something about this. That was kind of, you could see what they were setting up. But they were trying to expand at least that was the narrative last night. This is expanding the scope of the war, saying this is not just a war in Ukraine anymore. This would be a real big deal. Well, I was watching Steve Lookner's stream, and I think that Steve has been, even though obviously he's reading mostly very pro-Ukrainian sources, he's still been, I think he's been trying to be very fair in as far as when he's looking at stuff. Okay, is this fake or is this real? Does this make sense? He has that modicum of skepticism that you need, even if you're a biased source or something like that. He's not trying to tell lies to prop up the Ukrainian side, which a lot of people are doing in this war, including the folks in the OSINT crowd. And so between Lookner, actually giving the source of the stream, linking it in his chat, I was able to go look at it. And he was looking on Street View trying to figure it out. And then folks in the chat actually figured it out first. And then we were trying to tell Steve, what was going on, where it was. We figured out where the building is and what building it was that the Russians were actually attacking. And this was an administrative building. It was not one of the nuclear reactors. They were actually shooting, they were not shooting in the direction of where the reactors were. The Russians were, the reactors were north of where the Russians were shooting, facing the river. The Russians were shooting west into this building. And so this firefight that we were watching unfold live on this stream on YouTube, it was supposed to show us the Russians, just flagrantly attacking a nuclear reactor and which we all know would be very dangerous if you start shooting RPGs into a reactor and maybe damage the cooling system, cause a meltdown, something like that. It could be catastrophic. But alas, that is not what happened. As I said, this was an administrative building. We figured that out pretty quickly, and this was not the most dangerous, careless thing that it was being made out to be. Nevertheless, in the early minutes of this story, the media was able to jump on it and run with that, what I just said earlier, even though now it's been debunked. And this, I believe, I think it was debunked a little too quickly for it to really take a good effect. This narrative was supposed to drive the push for a no-fly zone, even though the Russians were not bombing this nuclear reactor. No, in fact, the Russians, their air superiority has been questioned, rightly or wrongly, over the last week, over the course of this war. They seem to be using air power quite sparingly, relative to what they could be doing. And so you might scratch your head and say, well, why a no-fly zone of all things? Well, because the folks involved, everybody knows, no-fly zone is code for World War III. Because as soon as you impose a no-fly zone, that means that you're going to shoot down Russian jets. And what are the Russians just going to say? Oh, okay, we're participating in this war, and we're just going to not fly planes anymore. No, the Russians are going to fly planes anyway. And if NATO scrambles fighter jets to try and shoot them down, Russia's just going to engage those NATO jets. And at that point, when you have Russian jets and maybe Polish or American or Romanian fighters, engaging in a dogfight over the skies of Ukraine, that is a third world war. It's instant. I mean, we said this back when there were calls by Hillary Clinton when she was running for president to impose a no-fly zone in Syria. We said that's World War III. You're saying you're going to shoot down Russian jets? Are you freaking insane? And sadly, that's where what Volodymyr Zelensky is now pushing. In fact, he is NATO today, after they came out and said, no, we're not going to impose a no-fly zone in Syria, and we're not going to put, or in Ukraine, and we're not going to impose, we're not going to put NATO troops in Ukraine. Even Jens Stoltenberg is not that crazy. And then, Zelensky has the gall to come out and say, oh, well, the NATO folks, they're insecure, and they're whiny, and they're afraid, and all this stuff, and, like, what are you saying? I mean, what position are you in to lecture NATO at this point because they don't want to fight your war for you? Now, I do, in a sense, I feel bad for Zelensky in that I'm sure that he was given many assurances. Hey, no, don't compromise with the Russians. Hey, be as tough on them as possible. We got your back. I'm sure he was told that by Western leaders, by NATO, by the United States, ever since he got elected. Because Zelensky ran, I've talked about this before. He ran for president on a platform of being soft on Russia. That was what he was elected on, from what I understand. Maybe there's some stuff lost in translation, but that's basically how I interpreted it. When he was running for president, I viewed him as the soft on Russia candidate. And he won. And he didn't win with the votes of Ukrainian Nazis. Those are not the people who voted for him. He won, largely with the vote of Russian sympathetic Ukrainians. I hate to tell you, but the Nazis are not voting for the Jewish candidate. But then when Zelensky got into office, he became, a major hawk. Just like, so many presidential candidates in let's say, the United States, who run on a platform of peace and then become quite hawkish once they make it into office. And it's like they're sat down by the deep state and told, okay, yeah, you ran on being you ran on a platform of peace, but let me tell you the way things actually work in this world. And that's what happened. Zelensky got a talking to, and they told him, you're going to be tough on Russia, and the West is going to back you up, and we got your back the whole way. Don't compromise. No, it's fine. Don't worry about it. And then he gets invaded by Russia because he's been, he said a lot of things to piss them off and to make them feel threatened. And so the Russians have decided to end his regime. And you know what? That's the wrong term. I shouldn't say his regime, because he's by no means the head of this government. He is the figurehead, but he's not in control. If he was, I think that things would be a lot better off. I think he comes across as a reasonable figure. But now that he knows that he's been played, now that he realizes, oh wait, they were lying to me when they said, no, just keep antagonizing Russia, we got your back. The West just wanted to antagonize Russia. Zelensky was used by them just to push Putin's buttons. And now that Putin has decided to fight back and to slap him down a little bit, the West is not going to go in and get involved in that fight. They're going to go, no, that's your problem, buddy. They were just using him. And now Zelensky is lashing out like a child and calling him names. And now we're getting polls. I don't know if I would call it a push-poll necessarily, because, when you try and poll on questions like this, where people really don't understand how any of this works, you can get some really crazy results. And what I'm alluding to here is that Reuters put out a poll, and I will link to this in the description, of Americans on their support for a no-fly zone and a ban on Russian oil. And supposedly, 74% of Americans support a no-fly zone in Ukraine. 80% support banning Russian oil, which, the various banks, so take this with a grain of salt, say banning Russian oil, that would send the price of oil to about $200. When you're talking about the global economy, anything over $100 a barrel is dangerous territory. And of course, a no-fly zone, that is a euphemism for World War III. So we're supposed to believe Americans support by massive super-duper majority, 74%, three-quarters, support no-fly zone, support World War III. 80% support $200 a barrel oil. If you ask the questions that way, do you support World War III? I'm sure you'd get 99% of Americans say no, not yes. If you asked them, hey, do you support $200 a barrel oil? 99.999, actually 100%, what am I saying? Who supports $200 a barrel oil? 100% of Americans would say, no, we don't support $200 a barrel oil. And yet now we have bipartisan pressure in Congress trying to push Biden, who is somehow the voice of reason on all of this, to ban Russian oil and to send the price of oil to $200. Fuel is already becoming unaffordable. Just the last time I filled up, I happened to look up at the diesel price, and it was $3.99 was the cash price. Today, I drove by a gas station, and it was in the 480s for diesel, like close to like 47 maybe, and that's the cash price. So you're paying $5 a gallon if you're using a credit card. $5 a gallon for diesel. That's all your trucks that deliver everything, your supply chains. That all runs on diesel. And of course, gasoline is, what is that, around 350-ish? I guess it's getting closer. It's getting further up than the 370s. It was around 350, I think, when I last filled up. And so this is fast. This is going really quick, this surge in gas prices. And so, yes, I think that, was oil already going up because of largely Biden's policies? Yeah, I would say so, because the Biden administration, there's been no capex put into oil exploration. We knew that. And I would say that's largely because the Biden administration is talking about phasing out fossil fuels. They're basically talking the language of the Green New Deal and saying, yeah, no more fossil fuels after 2030. And so investors listen to it, they say, okay, we need to not put our money into fossil fuels because the government's trying to kill that. And so what's the result? Well, now you're going to get less fossil fuel production. You're certainly not, getting it domestically here in America. You got to rely on OPEC and Russia. Well, you cut off Russian oil, that's sawing off your left arm to spite old Putin. But of course, on top of all this, just in the last week, this is as a result of the crisis in Ukraine and the threat of the West cutting Russia off from being able to export its fuel. So the short answer is both. The White House is acting like, oh, the only reason why gas prices are up is because of Putin. It's all Putin's fault. Well, no, it's mostly your fault. And of course, if we were expanding our fossil fuel production rather than contracting it and not building any new refineries, we would be able to weather this storm better. I've stated in the past just how fragile the supply chains are for so-called green energy, and how none of it's recyclable, and how these are extremely scarce resources that are only found in certain spots around the world. And I won't go so far as to say only fossil fuels are the future, but I would say oil is the future, oil and coal, and whether carbon is the future. That's what I'll say. Carbon-based fuels. Carbon's the building block of life. Always has been, always will be. And, whether the oil that we get is extracted out of the ground or whether it is synthesized through some kind of GMO biological process, like an oil crop that's heavily, genetically modified, like oil palms or something, so that they produce, enough oil to satisfy the global demand. We're not there yet. Obviously, we still use mostly fossil fuels, but I think that the future in biofuels is much, much more promising than all this green crap because, once you've got that established, that you can do that locally. There is no green energy without globalism, without totally unhindered global supply chains. It's just not possible. If you have any sort of break in the global supply chains, green energy is done. The internal combustion engine that people hate so much. What do you need to build one? You need iron to build the engine, and then you need oil to fuel the engine. Those are two very, very common components, very common natural resources that you can find all around the world. And even if they're insanely expensive, they're going to be easier to come by than these green energies. Because, all these minerals, things, they have to be mined. All that equipment runs on diesel fuel. Then they have to be shipped on trucks and on boats that run on diesel fuel all the way around the world. Then they have to be assembled in factories powered by electricity that is generated in coal-fired power plants. And then finally, at the end, you have a solar panel or a lithium battery that largely cannot be recycled, that is expendable, that will end up in a landfill, and then you'll have to start the whole cycle over again and constantly explore, new mining deposits for these extremely scarce resources around the world. And so I don't want to get into another green energy rant, which I've already done, but needless to say, we are walking down the road to disaster. Remember, China and Russia are on the same side here. If we're alienating Russia, that's going to spill over into China, especially if China goes to take Taiwan, which, why wouldn't China take Taiwan? What are we going to do? We, the holier-than-thou West, dependent on, once we've liberated ourselves from Russian fossil fuels, banking completely on green energy, all of which is only possible because of China. Because so many of these mineral deposits are in China, you cannot, the green fiction is not even, you can't even argue it without bringing China into the picture. And so at that point, why wouldn't China just say, hey, you know what, we're going to keep all this green energy to ourselves? Or, who knows, maybe the Chinese don't even have to do that. The West would sanction China and say, no, we're not going to buy your crap. We're not going to buy, and then, again, shooting ourselves in the foot. We go back to the Stone Age. And, I think that, maybe some lib trolls would listen to what I've been talking about and say, oh my gosh, listen to this Putin stooge. He's just criticizing everything America does. He's a blame America firster, which, I'm old enough to remember when that term, would be something you'd hear out of the mouths of, Republican voters. But now, it's your loyal Democrats, who are mad at people who blame America first. Well, it's sad for me to watch what, when I was born, was the most powerful, indisputably the most powerful country in the world, devolve to such an extent. And I'm so early in my life. I'm in my 20s, and I'm just watching America implode. And now here I am, just relying, hoping that the sanity of Joe Biden, that his will is strong enough to keep himself from giving in to the crazy demands of people in Congress and the Ukrainian lobby, which the Ukrainian lobby in Washington, I hear, is even larger than Saudi Arabia's. Ukraine, by many accounts, is the most powerful lobbying operation in Washington, which would explain why Congress is pushing all of a suddenly for this for the Russian oil ban. I haven't seen Congress pushing as strongly for the no-fly zone because, again, that is World War III. You're seeing, very failed congressmen like Adam Kinzinger push it. Oh, you're seeing Lindsey Graham calling for the assassination of Vladimir Putin. You're seeing, I shouldn't even mention Sean Hannity. He's such a joke. Nobody listens to him. But advocating for just bombing the Russian convoy north of Kiev, and then just pretending like we didn't do it, like they wouldn't know. I mean, this is also stupid. I want to laugh, but like these people, what they're talking about isn't nothing. What they're talking about could destroy my life, could destroy your life, could completely wreck our civilization. I mean, if you care about humanity, what you should be trying to do, instead of trying to affect who wins this war, because it's pretty clear who's going to win, the goal should be to end the war as quickly as possible. And from what I understand, it is the United States who, as I said earlier, has been egging Zelensky on this whole time and continues to do so. I guess they did encourage him to leave Kiev, which, might be smart, maybe not. But perhaps it's too late now for them to tell him, hey, it's really time to give up the ghost. And you should give in because you're not going to win. And it's just going to be more people dying. And then, but again, the war in Ukraine is one thing. The reaction to the war in Ukraine throughout the West is a whole other thing that really threatens to affect us. So anyway, I hope that this fades out. I hope that this dies down. Because neither of these things, cutting off Russian oil or imposing a no-fly zone, neither of them are options. I wouldn't say, oh, well, they're bad options. No, they're not options. That will end us. $200 a barrel oil will be the end of America. Our society will completely break down. People will go bankrupt. The government will collapse, given enough time. Obviously, if, oil is $200 a barrel for an hour, in the futures market, that's not going to destroy America. But I mean, if sustained, if there was a what's the term? A secular shock or a secular decline, a step down in the quantity of oil available to the Western market, that would be it. Because you would see, the desperation of people. It would, there would be no society to rule over anymore. People would be destitute, and American states would go about trying to find their own sources of energy, and they would go around federal regulators and just say, no, we're drilling for oil, and no, we're not going to send it all to Europe. Europe can buy gas from Russia if they want. That will happen. And the no-fly zone thing, I mean, I can't even think about that. I can't even fathom that it would ever be implemented, because we would all be dead. It's as simple as that. It's mutually assured destruction. Maybe some cities wouldn't get hit. Even if you're not directly impacted by the nuclear blast, you've got fallout, you've got the potential for nuclear winter, and then you've just got the collapse in society and supply chains and things. And it's like, well, what if you don't grow your own food? What are you going to do then? What if you do try and grow your own food and the crops are spoiled by radiation? However many millions die in the blasts, hundreds of millions more will starve to death or will die of radiation poisoning. And that's something that happens over decades. Sure, there's people who get the highest dose, die within a day or two, a couple weeks, a few months. But there are people who die years later because of the radiation exposure. That's what we saw with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and those were two small bombs. So a no-fly zone is not an option. That is the end of the world, not just the end of America. And I have to hope that at that point there'd be some kind of military coup. And I hate to say that. I think that coups are terrible. But I'm like, at that point, you just can't have the government firing off nukes. So, with that said, today was depressing, but that's what's going on right now. It's insanity. But I hope that this too will pass. And I will see folks back here tomorrow.